We began with this notion: nature abhors a vacuum, and so does organized crime. It has been more than a year since John Gotti began serving his life sentence for murder and racketeering, but control of the Gambino crime family, according to officials, still rests with the Dapper Don. According to published reports, John Gotti retained power by installing his son, John A. Gotti, as the youngest mafia boss in the United States. Can all of this last? Joining me now to discuss it, Jerry Capici of the New York Daily News. He is writing a book about the fall of John Gotti. Howard Bloom, former investigative reporter for the New York Times and author of this book, Gangland. Richard Rabach, a criminal defense attorney who has defended John A. Gotti in an assault case. Later on, joining us here, John Miller of NBC Television, and we'll take a look at some video he has for a series he has been doing on this very subject. I begin with Jerry Capici. Tell me what's going on. Let me back up a little bit, put this whole thing in context. Set up organized crime 10 years ago, and what John Gotti did in achieving the prominence he did before we talk about his fall and his son. How is it changing, and what's happened to it?
Well, I think what happened with Gotti is Gotti became the first mafia boss to beat the case, so kind of became a legend. He was the only mafia boss to go to trial on racketeering charges, and he beat the case. That enhanced his reputation with the public, with the mob, with law enforcement, with the media, and his ability to, be quick with one-liners and engage reporters with quick one-liners. I'm the boss of my wife and kids at home, things like that. Kind of enabled him to become a folk hero in the eyes of some. It also made him a bigger target of law enforcement, who, did everything they wanted. They, wanted to do everything they possibly could to bring him down. He's a little different from the mafia bosses that he succeeded.
Like Carlo Gambino, people like that.
Exactly, like Carlo Gambino, like Paul Castellano, who, felt the wrath of Gotti, and ended up being killed on East 46th Street. He was not the kind of guy who would hide behind the bags or the newspapers when the photographers came by, and he was the guy who was going to fight the government no matter what they said on tape, no matter what I said on tape. I'm going to deny everything. I'm not the boss of anything. I'm the boss of my wife and kids. They're persecuting me because, I'm just a different kind of guy. And that was his way of fighting back and trying to beat the government.
But he was clearly, because of the prosecutions that had taken place under RICO, and because RICO statute, and also because of a lot of leaders of organized crime who'd gotten older. No question that he not only was a different type, but was the boss of all bosses within organized crime.
Well, I don't think there is such a thing as a boss of all bosses anymore. One guy who controls all of organized crime throughout the country. Okay. It just doesn't exist, even in the city. I mean, what he was the boss of the Gambino crime family, which is one of the biggest. That and the Genovese crime families are the two biggest in the city and the two biggest in the country. And they vie for the lead and power and influence. But he did, at the time he was reigning at the top, was the boss of the biggest, most powerful organized crime family in the country, no question about it. And he ended up bringing, himself down because he wanted to make sure that everybody knew he was the boss. He insisted that all his supervisors, all his capos, all his soldiers come and pay homage to him on Mulberry Street. So what he did is he paraded all his guys into Mulberry Street so that the feds could see who they were and listen to them on tape, and he ended up bringing down the crime family himself.
All right, I'm going to come just in. I know you want to talk, Richard, but we'll get to that. Let me get Howard in here. This is a story that was in New York Magazine, which is an excerpt from a book he's written called Gangland, How the FBI Broke the Mob by Howard Bloom. And there you see at the very top of this pyramid, John Gotti. How did they do it before we get to the rest of the story?
Well, the FBI accomplished two things. They caught Gotti in his own words, admitting to crimes, admitting to participating in murders, and also they were able to turn Sammy the Bull Gravano, his number two guy, into testifying against him. They were able to turn Sammy the Bull by playing a tape of Gotti talking. On one of the tapes, Gotti is saying, in effect, I kill all these people for Sammy, I give him all these companies, and what do I get out of it? I don't even get a good sandwich. All I want is a good sandwich. When Sammy heard this, according to the FBI, he began thinking that if Gotti ever got this sandwich, his head would be in the middle. So he began thinking, when he went back to his cell, well, I've got to whack John. And he had no problems about this. Then he decided, if I whack John, I've got to whack John Jr. I've got to whack Frankie Lowe.
Whack is killing.
Yes, and he made a list in his mind of all the people he'd have to kill, and he seemed to have no compunctions about this, but he began thinking, where would I get the time, and how could I do this before they get me? So he cut a deal with the government, and he became a witness against John Gotti.
And he's continuing to testify in other trials involving members of the Gambino family?
He was in a trial this week in Brooklyn.
All right. And what will happen to him? He'll be in the witness protection program the rest of his life?
He's about to be sentenced early next year. It'd be interesting to see what's happened. He could either get time served, which is in effect no years, or up to 20 years, and it'd be interesting to see what the judge gives him.
All right. We'll get to the question. He is now, John Gotti is in Marion in prison for what, life sentence?
Life, yes,
without parole.
Right.
What's his life like there?
Well, I spoke last week in Boston with Tony Cardinale, who's the lawyer who's handling his appeal, one of the lawyers who's handling his appeal, and he says he visits him twice a month, and he says Gotti's mood is great. He's staying in great shape, doing 1,000 sit-ups a day, 1,000 push-ups. He's turned his bed into a Stairmaster. But he says, you know, it's hard. He can't see his family. There's a plastic screen separating them when they come and visit. But he said his mood is great. He's, according to his lawyer, he's getting 1,000 letters a month. I mean, it points out to the image that you made of a folk hero.
Can he direct the mob from inside prison? It's been done before, but because of all the attendant publicity to him, can he do it?
I think he's going to have a very hard time. Part of the reason is his son seems to have inherited from John mostly his temper. His son, I don't think, is cut from the same cloth as the father. The father, in many ways, was or is a charismatic man, a man who understood the media. The son is more of a thug. It's just going to be hard to do it that way.
Richard, I'm coming to you. What else? How would you characterize the difference in these two people, John Gotti Jr., and known as John A. Gotti, and John Gotti?
Well, John A. Gotti, who was referred to as Junior by the media and I guess by
Baby Don by some.
His gangsters, he is. I think it's too much too soon. I mean, he has whatever strength he does have right now because of his father. If his father were not the boss of the Gambino crime family, John A. Gotti would basically not even be, well, he might not even be a made guy. So I think whatever power he has because of his father. Right now it's kind of an interesting mix, or an interesting phenomenon going on in the Gambino crime family. You've got 7 more cases coming in which Sammy Gravano is going to be a witness. So you've got a lot of the important capos in the family basically kind of like just hold on to their own, see what's going to shake out, see if they're going to be convicted, see if they're going to be indicted, and kind of they're willing to let Junior run the show for his father at the moment. From what I get, they're not giving as much tribute to the son as they gave the father. He's only 29 years old. He didn't work his way up to the position he has right now. And, you know, he's kind of like looked on with a little bit of disdain by most of the
people
captains.
watching this want to know 2 things before I go to Richard. One is, where do you get your information? Clearly you have sources within the FBI. Obviously you had for this book. But do members of organized crime talk to you? Do you have sources there who tell you what's going on?
Well, I get my information, Charlie, from anybody who will talk to me. That includes a lot of people. It includes law enforcement officials, defense lawyers, prosecutors, organized crime associates, and on occasion organized crime members. And you know, since I've been covering organized crime with with regularity in the last 5 or so years, I think I've developed sources who tell me honestly what's going on.
Because they want to see the ongoing saga that you are reporting in the pages of the New York Daily News?
Well, some for that reason, some because they have a particular axe to grind against someone else and think that they're being jobbed or given a bum rap for some reason and want me to get what they consider to be the straight scoop. I think the reason why I'm able to function pretty much the way I do with kind of what I consider grudging respect from the organized crime guys I write about, is because I will take shots at the government when they screw up and when I feel that they've done something that they shouldn't be doing. I mean, Richard Raybach can speak to that later. But I think there is a tendency by many reporters and many TV reporters, print, television, and radio, to kind of like take what the government gives and just spit it out without double checking. I think for the most part the government, FBI, cops do a good job and are honest, but they do screw up on occasion. Occasionally they trample on people when they shouldn't, and I try to point the difference.
Ever talk to John Gotti?
Except for quick hallway stuff, no. John Gotti, I don't think would ever agree to an interview from anyone.
Anyone?
From anyone, I don't think so. I mean, I think all the interviews
So far. I mean, I think John Gotti, I think is looking to a whole new future. Interestingly enough, Sammy Bull is now thinking about doing a book. I spoke with Sammy Bull, I guess it was late last summer. The FBI put me in touch with him, and he came out and said at the end of the conversation, "You guys," meaning reporters, "are a lot worse than anything I've ever been." He killed 19 people. So that's one view, my view of the press. Also, the FBI, is an interesting organization. They don't seem to be in control of the situation very often. To do my book, Gangland, got permission from the FBI to speak to all the people involved. Now that the book has been published, as a new FBI director, Director Free, he's now ordered the Office of Professional Responsibility.
That's nonsense. That's nonsense.
If I can continue.
I'll come back to the nonsense in a minute. Stand by, Richard.
It's unbelievable I've stayed quiet this long.
I know, but I'm going to give you a long time.
He's ordered the Office of Professional Responsibility to begin investigating, what agents talked to me, and they've interviewed prosecutors. I, in fact, got 2 calls from the FBI office myself, from Joe Valaquette of the FBI, and he wanted to know, did I speak to a specific agent? Did a specific agent give me specific information? I mean, so they're really turning the screws on men who are heroes.
Jerry, what's nonsense?
Well, I think I've said publicly before that I think the book is a fraud.
And written publicly.
Written publicly, I think the book is a fraud. I was in one of the trials that Sammy Gravano was testifying at this week, and I spoke to 3 of the 3 FBI agents who are in a specific scene that Mr. Bloom writes about in his book, and every one of them told me it was a lie, flat out. So he's got 4 people in a scene here.
They're telling you. I'm not so sure that's so accurate. And again, why would they be investigating the book if it were inaccurate?
And I think what the guy has done is crafted a book that he thought would be a big seller and that he thought would be great for the movies. If you want to get
accusing him of being deliberately dishonest.
Of course he. Yes, I am.
Right.
He's lied throughout the book, like I've said publicly before. I mean, he says, for example, that there are 3,000 members of the Gambino crime family. That's a joke.
How many?
There's about 200.
You have the count of them all. They all call Jerry every day.
Reader's Digest called me up and said, "Jerry, we realize that you've got this, problem with gangland, but we're excerpting it and we're doing a couple of pages on this book. And could you help us with all the inaccuracies and corrections and what?" I said, "Listen, I don't want to be your fact checker." He said, "Please." He says, "The FBI said." I mean, everybody knows that the book is
I'm going to give Howard last word on this before.
I mean, the bottom line to this whole
Howard Bloom,
dispute.
before we move on, because I want to get Richard, as I promised,
the
in
bottom
here.
line to this whole dispute.
I'm sure you are. We're getting right to you.
I mean, the bottom line to this whole dispute between Jerry and I is that he's upset that he's written books that don't sell. He's upset that they're making my book into a movie. I mean, Jerry isn't red with indignation. I really think he's green with envy. And I'm sorry, Jerry. If I can give you 2 free tickets to the movie premiere, we'd be glad to have you there.
I don't have to lie about my age. I don't have to lie about what college I went to.
Oh, Jerry, you twist so many facts around. It's ridiculous.
And I don't have to really
Jerry, just ridiculous.
I said that
Your book is
before when
filled
you
with
asked
so
me
many
to come on.
inaccuracies, but also it's also boring to read.
We can't settle this here, although it's fascinating television and fascinating dialogue. But I want to get to Richard, as I promised. You've been listening to this, not the most recent part, including the most recent part. How many members do you think there are in the Gambino family, for example?
Charlie, I'm not going to get into that. And I'll tell you, my response
To what's been said so far about John Gotti, son.
My response to your question, and obviously those are the questions that are always asked of lawyers who have been on various cases. And,
What questions?
All this stuff about how many members do you believe is something. I mean,
who's in control?
There's one of the oldest lessons we learned in the law, and that is compound questions, assuming facts not in evidence. That's the lawyer's talk. The classic example is the question, how many times do you beat your wife? I mean, that presumes you beat your wife. Questions like that are exemplified by what's going on with these 2 gentlemen right here. they both write books.
Neither of us beat our wives.
I'm the only one who's not writing a book.
Well, no, that's not true.
Oh, no.
I'm not writing a book.
No, I mean amongst your guests.
Yeah, right.
It's interesting, and Jerry made a good approach at publicizing the fact that he is writing a book in this area, and he's talking about his notices. Mr. Blum writes a book, ostensibly, I notice, steals his column name. So there's going to be an antipathy back here about who's
right,
accurate
but get on
and
to the
who's
point.
not.
I want you to tell me what.
The point is,
you know John A. Gotti?
Yes,
You
I did.
represented John A. Gotti.
Yes, I did.
Tell me about him.
Tell me about him. He's a young man who, quite frankly, is struggling very hard to run businesses that are quite legitimate and has many troubles every day with harassment by law enforcement agencies, going to people who he has contracts with to do service, and they telling him the litany of stories, who you're dealing with.
Has he succeeded his father as head of the Gambino family?
Who says that?
I'm asking.
James Fox? I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know. I'm a defense lawyer. I practice criminal law. When somebody's arrested for a crime, I represent them. I ensure their rights are taken care of. And I do everything in my power, fight as hard as I can to make sure that a person has a fair trial, an even slate. What's going on here is an interesting situation.
Where? At this table?
This table and out in the world. We have law enforcement agencies. You asked about sources. Law enforcement agencies feeding material to gentlemen such as these, to newspaper article writers, columnists, television personalities, Mr. Miller included, who are feeding them information.
Not here yet.
As telltale anonymous sources, unnamed law enforcement official, putting out the straight poop, in their words, for what purpose? If Mr. Fox or some of the... Let me finish this, Charlie. If Mr. Fox or some of these people are going to put out a propaganda campaign and try these cases in the papers and on television, what are they doing it for? Are they doing it to ensure fairness? Are they doing it to back up their own professionalism? Or are they doing it to send a message and virtually condition the public as to a set of facts, specific set of facts? Why are they doing that?
All right, well, let me turn to Jerry.
That's a real question.
Jerry
John
Capisi.
Gotti was convicted fair and square. I mean, what
I
bugs
don't
me,
think
what
anybody
bugs,
can-
Let him
what bugs
finish. That's
me
ridiculous.
about, what
Finish.
bugs me about some of the stuff you hear from some defense lawyers, and Richard right now, is that they disregard what has happened. I mean, when John Gotti was acquitted in 1987, everybody was ranting and raving about how, a courageous jury stood up and acquitted him and rah, rah, rah. Now that he's been convicted and his appeal has been affirmed, has been rejected, and his conviction was affirmed, I think it's about time for the defense bar and everybody to understand that John Gotti was the boss of the Gambino crime family. He was a gangster. He killed 11 people. That's what the testimony was at the trial. And that, he's away in jail for the rest of his life, and he was properly so.
Okay.
And in 87, when he
Wait, hold on one second, Richard. Let
he
Howard
was
tell me that
acquitted,
complete.
it was because the juror had been bought. The foreman of the jury had been bought for $60,000.
Oh, that's a lot of crap, and
the
everybody
guy,
knows that.
the guy has been convicted for that.
No, he wasn't convicted of that. And if you get your facts straight, you know.
He wasn't convicted of that? What was he
No.
convicted
Well,
of?
who was convicted
You
of
get your
what?
facts straight, that's not
A
correct.
juror at the first trial was convicted of
Taking $60,000 bribe.
obstruction of justice,
Soliciting on his
soliciting a bribe,
own.
and
Soliciting
he was
on
sentenced to
his
3 years
own
for it.
two people. This
No
is a
question about
person who the government's version.
We're
I've never
almost
met
agreeing.
this person. No, I'm not almost
No,
agreeing.
Jerry and I.
Now,
Every so often.
a great distinction. The story that comes out by some of these writers about that first trial is that people reach the jury. That's the big story. That's the way the government wants to put it out because they have to make themselves whole again
But the
because
guy
they
was
had a lousy
convicted of it.
case. They had
And
a lousy
Gravano
case.
testified
But
to
you
it.
know,
All right, stop.
guy was convicted, though,
no, he was not convicted of what you
He was
say.
convicted of...
Richard, I'm not going to argue this point and eat up any more time. John Miller is not here, but we do have the tape, I think. Just so you can see some of the faces that go with some of the story, here is John Miller's piece from WNBC television here in New York.
As we watched, John Gotti Jr. came to the Bergen Club each day. Being the acting boss, and that's what the FBI says he is, he derives his power from his father, who will remain boss in jail. But that makes Junior the street boss, the youngest in history. That means between visits to his father once a month in Marion Prison, he calls the shots.
Everywhere you go, you're there.
Yeah, is it true that you're the new boss of the Gambino crime
Absolutely
family?
not. I'm the boss of my wife and my children.
While his lawyers insist all his businesses are legit, when he needs to make certain phone calls, he has one of the workmen drive him to a payphone. Maybe with all the work going on at the house, they haven't gotten around to installing the phone yet. Sure he's not a mob boss?
He lives a relatively simple life. He does go to his businesses, follow him around and see who he sees.
We did follow him. Each day we tailed him, John A. Gotti, trucking and auto parts entrepreneur, went straight to the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club. And he hung out there with Fat Sally Scala, allegedly a hitman in the Castellano murder, and others like Georgie Brooklyn, Jimmy Irish, Tommy Sneakers, Jackie Cavallo, and Charlie Carnelia, two allegedly made members of the Gambino crime family. And when the young reputed Don goes for a ride, Carnelia becomes his driver. Oh, and don't try to follow them. They hate that.
Okay. But my real name is Mister.
There he is.
According to the FBI, when John Gotti made his son a soldier in the family, he was one of the youngest ever. And when he promoted him to captain, or capo, he gave him his own club and his own crew. And that offended a lot of old-timers.
I think he has a problem about maintaining whatever power he has. Our feeling is if he would step down gracefully, he could probably remain alive. If he refuses to do so, he may see that there's going to be violence in store.
Our thanks to John Miller and WNBC for allowing us to use that tape, which gave you some sense of the pictures that match the names that are in action and in play here. I'll start with Howard Bloom. Tell me where you think this is going to happen. What's going to happen over the next year or so, and what factors will cause change?
I think one of the important things the FBI did in the Gotti case was not just take down John Gotti. They really destroyed the whole family. As pointed out, they got the administration. They're moving against the capos in trials. I think Sammy the Bull is going to be effective in the courtroom in cases to come. And I think out of those ashes, the Gambino family, a decimated version of the Gambino family, will of course survive, but I don't think John Gotti Jr. is going to be at the top of it.
You think John Gotti Sr. will ever get out of prison?
I don't think so, no.
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 Jerry?
No, that's pretty much what I've written before. Yeah, John Gotti Sr. Or John Gotti the boss will probably die in jail. I don't think his son will carry on too much longer as the acting boss for his son. I would say the key period is next spring when James Brown Fiella goes on trial along with another captain. Two captains go on trial next spring, Jimmy Brown Fiella and Danny Marino. Both of them in the same case. They're accused of racketeering and a specific murder on Gotti's behalf. And they're two powerful captains. Right now, like I said earlier, they've got their own problems, the law, their own case. When that trial is over, I think that will pretty much end Gravano's testimony. And I think the Gambino crime family will try and reassert itself. Somebody will come to the front.
And what happens to Gravano?
Gravano hopes that he gets out of jail really quickly. I mean,
Which is the reason he did it in the first place.
He served about 3 years. The guessing is that he'll probably get somewhere between 6 and 10 years in prison, similar to what Leonetti got after, for his cooperation.
Jerry DePizzi's column, Gangland, is in the New York Daily News. Howard Bloom's book, Gangland. Richard, I assume you'll be back on a criminal trial somewhere.
Somewhere, someplace.
Yeah, who are you? Are you representing any of these figures coming up?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Thank you all. I'm sorry John Miller couldn't be here. We saw his footage. John is a frequent guest on this broadcast, and hopefully he'll be back very soon. When you look at the Gotti case, it appears that you and the FBI were obsessed with putting John Gotti behind bars because, among other reasons, because he tended to appear to thumb his nose at law enforcement, and secondly, because he had been acquitted 3 times.
I wouldn't use the term obsessed because to me that indicates you're not using rational thinking if you have an obsession about something. I would certainly say he was a top priority for the FBI in our organized crime program. He was the boss of the largest, most powerful mafia family in the country. There are 5 families in New York. The Gambinos are the biggest and strongest. But just to give you a measure of the organized crime situation in New York, the smallest New York family is larger than any other family in the entire United States. So New York is clearly the hub of the mafia organized crime efforts.
Tell me about the money that they generate annually through all of the nefarious and criminal activities.
Well, they're into virtually anything, any venture, which will bring them a lot of money with little risk, any venture. Now, something that has changed, in the old days, they had penetrated the labor unions on many, many fronts, and they would go into the unions and loot the union pension fund. Of course, the union pension funds are full of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. And that was an easy skim for them. In recent years...
In particular, the Teamsters.
Yeah. In recent years, through a process called Civil RICO, we've slowly began to separate them from the unions, and that's a situation where the court says to the organized crime family, such as the Gambinos, you stay away from the union and anyone in the union, and if I catch any of you anywhere near it, you're all going to jail. It's slow in being implemented, but it's going to be very effective.
Gotti, back to Gotti. Could you have done it without the testimony of Sammy the Bull Gravano?
You know, I'm convinced until Sammy the Bull decided to cooperate with the prosecution and testify, the case was built almost entirely on overhears, clandestine tape recordings. And we got him where he thought we couldn't get him. What he thought was his safe haven upstairs of the Ravenite.
But even then, didn't they primarily talk in places that they didn't expect you could be within the confines of that building?
Well, that's what he thought. He was safe in the back apartment, he thought. Or they would have what they would call a walk and talk, where they'd walk around the street and talk about crucial issues. And then the weather turned cold or it would be raining, and more they reverted to the upstairs apartment. And despite his assessment, our agents were able to penetrate that apartment electronically. And some people believe that virtually every time John Gotti opened his mouth, he violated another law. And that's overstating it, of course.
But you couldn't have done it without Sammy's testimony?
No, I'm convinced we could have done it with just the wiretaps, just the overhears. Now, when Sammy decided he would testify for us, in my view, that was just the final nail in the coffin, and our assessment at the FBI went from this is a complicated case, it could take weeks or a month for the jury to deliberate and bring back a verdict. As soon as we knew Sammy was going to testify, a lot of our guys said it'll be a matter of days and the jury will be back. And of course, it took a day and a half and they came back guilty.
Now, he is continuing to testify in other cases.
Yes, he is. Quite a few others. He's in custody. He's in jail. He's not living a life of ease.
But he's in a kind of isolation, isn't he, with other
Absolutely.
mob informants?
He is not put in with the general prison population. He's other cooperating witnesses are under the same program.
If he was put into a general prison population, could he survive that?
I doubt it. He'd be killed. Knowing Sammy as I do, I think I know him fairly well. We did come to know one another.
Yeah, but that's an interesting relationship. How did you come? I mean, what was that? Go ahead. You don't think he?
I don't think he could survive simply because there are so many people in the general prison population that know they would be given an enormous sum of money if they could kill Sammy the Bull. Sammy, as strong and powerful and fearless as he is, you know, you can't stand up to an entire prison population.
Why did he do it in the end?
I think he felt John Gotti had betrayed him and had betrayed the family. When John Gotti killed Paul Castellano, he told Sammy, Paul has ruined La Cosa Nostra, he's ruined the Gambino family, we're going to take it over and we're going to make it what it should be, what it used to be in the golden days. But Sammy says as soon as he came to power, he began to see slow changes, and John became just like Paul, actually perverting the Gambino family, and that disillusioned Sammy. And then he began to discover that the defense that John Gotti was preparing was a defense for Gotti, not for Gotti and Sammy the Bull. And he heard some things that Gotti said behind his back, really derogatory things, and Sammy thought to himself, even if I get out, I'll have to kill John Gotti because of these things he said behind my back, because I know he's going to be coming after me.
And how many people had he killed?
Sammy self-admitted 19 murders.
Yeah. What's going to happen? So you use him, he's in a witness protection program, you use him, he's in prison. Will he get out of prison because he'll never get out of prison?
Well, he will someday. When he's through testifying, he will be sentenced. He hasn't been sentenced yet. And it's up to the judge how lengthy a sentence he wants to give him. Most of our people figure it'll be 15 to 20 years.
And what would you recommend based on how he cooperated?
That's not my field. I wouldn't make a recommendation, but
do you think he should be given a sentence of only 15 to 20 years, a man who has acknowledged murdering 19 people?
That would not disturb me because he has been so helpful in dismantling organized crime.
So he gets away with it because he becomes an informant?
Doesn't get away with it.
He gets away with 20 years, which means that he can get out in, what, 5?
Probably closer to 10.
To 10, yeah. And then what happens? He goes off and assumes some separate identity, and what are his chances then?
It depends on how closely he follows the rules. If he does what we tell him to in the witness protection program, he'll be okay. But so many of them don't.
You can't. They don't like the life. And they got to contact an old girlfriend, an old family member, and therefore they expose themselves. John Gotti's in jail in what, Illinois?
Marion,
where is it?
yes.
Marion, Illinois. And how is he being treated in jail? What is his contact with the outside world, and how does he, as some say, continue to be able to run his family?
He's closely scrutinized.
Because his attorney was on here one day complaining of how he was treated in jail.
Well, initially, he's in what they call a lockdown for 23 hours a day. Very limited activities that you can engage in when you're new at Marion, and then if you take a positive attitude, if there is such a thing in Marion, follow the rules completely, gradually you get more privileges are afforded to you. John Gotti can have visitors, I believe it's 5 times a month. His brother and his son are the usual visitors. That's the way he's trying to keep control of the Gambino family.
They have to speak in some kind of code, don't they? Aren't you listening?
Sure. No, they have to speak in code, but they've been working together long enough. They know what they're doing when they're talking about these things.
And how long can that last before there's a contest for leadership in that family?
That's the key point. The case, of course, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals confirmed the conviction, and so now it's going up to the Supreme Court. No doubt in my mind they'll confirm it. When that happens...
No errors were made at the court trial?
No.
Okay.
The people at know say this is a strong, sound prosecution.
Yeah. What do you think of these guys? Are they smart? Are they the most malevolent people you've ever seen? Is it a separate culture that none of us who are not part of it could ever understand? How do you explain this New York Magazine story about the lawyer and these lawyers who get close to them and seem to somehow be drawn into the romance of the whole thing when it seems to be terribly unattractive from where I look?
Well, you know, as a career in law enforcement, I certainly can't say in any way that they're innocent or there's a reasonable explanation, but I think your last point, that it's a way of life for them. It's just the way they grew up. In fact, I had this conversation with Sammy the Bull on several occasions. He said when he was growing up in the neighborhood, it was almost an honorable thing for one of your goals to be to if not be a made member of a family, at least to be an associate, an informal outsider, but still have contacts within the mob. He said that was just part of the life of the neighborhood where he grew up. So he went in the Army, he came out, he began to rise, and finally he was made in the mob, and everybody was so proud and happy for him.
He'd done well.
He had done very well.
Yeah. You liked him. Yeah, come on, you liked him.
I did like Sammy.
But you didn't like Gotti.
Well, I didn't like
Gotti.
I have to say I admire certain strengths in both of them.
The strength in Gotti was that he took it like a, quote, man. He didn't whine.
Exactly right, and I'm sure he's serving his time in Marion, as tough as it is. I'm sure he's serving it like a man, too.
Standing up.
Yes, without complaint.
Is that what the word is on Gotti?
I believe it is. And with Sammy the Bull, in a sense, he and Gotti were alike. Perhaps that's why they were boss and underboss. I'm convinced that neither one of these guys, neither Gotti nor Sammy, have ever known a moment of fear in their life. And that's going to continue.
Have never known a moment of fear about anything.
That's just the feeling I get. With Sammy the Bull,
Well, obviously Sammy the Bull knew a moment of fear because he thought John Gotti was going to turn him in or was going to...
I don't know if you would call that fear. He assessed that situation and he said, I'm going to have to act to neutralize it.
Prison with his boss, John Gotti, and thought about his options. Staying loyal to a man he feared was about to betray him, or cooperating with the authorities to save himself. The following year, Sammy the Bull Gravano became the highest-ranking Mafia member to testify against his own. Although in the years since the trial he has been in hiding, there was at least one person in contact with him, author Peter Moss, whose previous books include Serpico and the Valachi Papers. The new book, Underboss, is the result of his interviews with Gravano, and it is generating a lot of attention and a lot of controversy and top-rated television programs. I'm pleased to have Peter Moss join us this evening. Welcome, sir.
Delighted to be with you, Charlie.
It's good to
as
have you.
always.
Well, tell me, are you surprised about the reaction to this week? Primetime television, Primetime Live, the highest rated show of the evening, included an interview, Diane Sawyer, Gravano, you included, and others. What is it about this story that's so compelling to people? And B, are you surprised?
Well, I think, first of all, Hollywood creates our myths, and for many, many years, the Western was the great American myth, and then with the Godfather saga, the Mafia itself replaced the Western as something of intense interest, I think, the American public. So I think that there's a fascination, you know, and the Westerns always ended up with the shootout.
Yeah, black versus white and all that.
There was a violent death always waiting in the wings, and the Mafia supplied the same thing, and certainly the Godfather. The Godfather created this kind of romantic image, glamorous image, and John Gotti picked that up pretty fast. I think he conducted himself, he looked, and he dressed just like Americans wanted a gangster to look and act like.
Almost as if out of Hollywood.
Right, exactly.
Do you know whether John Gotti has seen or read the book?
No, I haven't. I think he's in prison. I think a bookstore has to send it to him. I don't think he can.
Yeah, but people who know him, correspond with him, might want to send it out there.
I am sure he's going to say he hadn't read the book, and I'm also sure that he will read it.
Or has already read it.
I don't know, because this book was under heavy embargo. As a matter of fact, I did not get a copy. One copy last Friday night, that's a week ago. 3 days before it was to be published, there was real security. There were no review copies, no anything, but you're right, it's selling pretty good.
Why is it going to be on the New York Times bestseller list this weekend, or do you know?
No, it's too quick.
It takes 2 weeks, okay.
Yeah.
Why you? How did you end up with this opportunity to do this book?
Well, what happened was this. He was in the Witness Protection Program, and apparently a great number of writers wrote to him through the U.S. Marshal Service, asking to work with him on a book, and as told to, I don't know what they said, I didn't read the letters. I know there were a lot of them. And I think that's when he really started thinking about the possibility of a book, and he asked a friend, a trusted friend, for some recommendations, and I was recommended.
Did you know the friend that made the recommendations?
Yes, slightly, not
Okay.
well.
A made man?
No, not a made man. A woman, actually.
Yeah.
And he had read the Valachi Papers, and he was sent Killer Spy, my last book about Older James,
Right.
and he loved it. And so a meeting was arranged. My first meeting, all the meetings took place west of the Mississippi River, in various locations, never where he resided.
And how were you, I'm going to get back to the story of how it happened, but how was it set up? Somebody would call you and say he'll be at this hotel at this time and show up at this
No,
day?
what happened was somebody did call me, often, the marshals, and they would tell me to go to X city, for instance, the first time.
Yeah.
And when I got there was another message to go to another city. And I arrived there, and I was met, and I was taken to a hotel. I spent the night there. In the morning, I was picked up, and I was taken to still another hotel where I met him. And I later found out he was not staying at the hotel where we were meeting. And I assume a lot of this was to make sure we live in a very leak-prone world.
Make sure you hadn't told anybody you had to go see Sammy Gravano.
That's right, or I didn't even tell my wife the first couple of times, and I guess the idea was that if word got out, I'd be followed in order to see, the bad guys.
Now, when you went for the first meeting, had you met him, had you corresponded with him, had you talked to him on the telephone?
I talked to him once on the telephone.
What was that like?
He called, and he said he liked the book, he liked Killer Spy, and why didn't we get together? And I wanted that too, because if I went ahead with this book, with the dozens and dozens and dozens of hours of interviews that I finally had with them, there had to be some kind of chemistry between us, or it would all be for naught. And the first 3 days were, first of all, to see how we got along, and I didn't take any notes. I didn't have a tape recorder, and we talked about his life. I wanted to get a feel of him. And all the feelings I had as far as the book was concerned were very positive. He was very forthright, very candid, as he remained throughout. He never tried to excuse anything. He never tried to find a rationale for his life in the mob. There are two things, critical things that happened during his life that were out of his control, which I think contributed heavily to his ending up in Cosa Nostra. But he never made a point of it. He never said, no, well, you know, if this didn't happen.
What are those two things?
First thing was he grew up in Bensonhurst in Long Island. Brooklyn. I mean, I am tired tonight. Bang, bang.
All right.
Which an awful lot of people in New York don't know much about. It's kind of like a Sicilian village in flat land.
Right.
He grew up there and went to school there, but in the 4th grade, a traumatic thing happened. He was held back in the 4th grade, and his parents went to find out what the matter was, and in effect, they were told that he probably was a little retarded. What he had, in fact, was dyslexia, severe dyslexia, which nobody, believe me, in Bensonhurst had ever heard of. And so he more or less accepted this fact, and...
So in his own mind, he was retarded,
well,
not dyslexic.
Well, he couldn't figure it out. But, for instance, humiliations piled on him at school, and other students would be asked to spell independence or whatever, and then they would say, Sammy, spell cat. And the whole classroom would break out in titters, right? And he was a tough kid. And while he's only 5'5", he was the same. He stopped growing when he was about 14. So after school, he would beat up some of these other fellows that were
make
mocking.
fun of him, he'd beat you up.
And he said, you know, that's when I found out violence paid. Because I was a major
And that's when he earned the nickname the Bull.
It happened a little later. He was 10. First of all, another thing about him, he came from what would be considered a middle-class family in Bensonhurst. His parents owned the house. They had a car, a garage, that kind of thing. And they gave him a bicycle when he was 10 years. It's not to say they were wealthy or by any means, but they gave him a bicycle that was stolen. And a couple of days later, a friend said, hey, Sammy, there are two boys down in the corner have your bicycle. They were older boys. And he ran down, and sure enough, there they were, and he waded in, both of them. Now, across the street...
One at a time or together?
Together. As he said, I was getting beat up pretty good, but I was giving a little bit of my own, but I wasn't giving up that bicycle. I knew I was not going to get another one. And a number of local wise guys were hung out at a bar across the street from where all this was going on. And they came over, and they said, what's going on here? And he said, and Sammy says, these guys stole my bike, blah, 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 and this, that, and the other thing. And they listened to this whole thing. And finally, two of them said to the boys, the older boys, leave him alone, it's his bike, beat it. And if your fathers have any problems with this, they can come see us. And as they left and Sammy started to leave with his bicycle, one of the wise guys called to the other standing on the corner and said, you see this little Sammy? He's like a little bull. Yeah. And that's how he got the name, Sammy.
Plus you got
Bull.
that respect that he had, or I guess
right.
that sort of sense of these guys.
Go ahead.
No.
These were the only people who didn't care about his dyslexia, his difficulty in reading and writing. They didn't care about any of that. They were the only ones.
Do you like him?
He's a charming guy. I've met other wise guys who are charming too. Yes. You had to like him. You couldn't spend all this time with him and not like him.
Is he different from other wise guys you know of his rank?
Yeah. Well, I don't know of any of his rank.
Yeah.
Because he was number two in the most powerful crime family in America. He's smart. I was impressed about how smart he is.
Smart about what?
Intelligence, business. The prosecutor in the case said, you know, in a way, Sammy had a wasted life. He would have been a great success as a businessman in construction.
And he probably realizes that now?
I think he accepts it. He makes no excuses about himself. The closest he comes to acknowledging remorse was one line that I thought was very interesting. He said, the fact that I gave loyalty to Cosa Nostra above loyalty to my wife and my children is something I'm going to have to live with for the rest of my life. So that told me a lot about what operates inside.
We've got way into the story, but let me just come back
Sure.
to you. So you go and you meet him, you spend time with him.
Right.
You like him, you're learning a lot. He's open, he's agreeable, he's talking, he's candid.
Very matter of
Doesn't
fact.
lie to you as far as you can tell.
At that time, yes.
Did he ever lie to you?
No, no.
Did he ever not answer any question you asked?
I had trouble getting him to answer some things that were touched very closely to him. But,
Like what?
Well, one of the problems, which is a thing that annoys him a great deal, is his wife's brother was killed. And all the headlines, all the papers, all the Gotti people say Sammy killed him, killed the brother of his wife. Well, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm splitting hairs here, but Sammy did not kill the brother, but he let it happen.
Was he there?
No, he was not there. And then the story came that his body was chopped up. The brothers
Fed to the dogs or something?
Well, that is a total fun. That's one of the things that amuses me about the media. I have read this story about how the dog pranced into Sammy's in-laws' living room with the hand of their son in its mouth. It's total fabrication. It never happened. And any reporter could have gone to the police and said, hey, what they did was fine. His body was chopped up, but they found it, I don't know, miles away. They found a hand. No dog ran in, but it made for a grisly story, didn't it? Horrifying story.
Mm-hmm. Did you learn anything about Cosa Nostra that you didn't know because of your own writing experience?
In the abstract, I didn't learn anything.
Well, in the specific.
In the scenes, how these men at the top think and act, their reactions to things, what they want, what they do to gain things. It's very intimate. That's the main reason I wrote this book, Charlie. I didn't write, it's not a defense of Sammy and what he did. There's no sugarcoating at all in the book. But for me, this was a golden opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reveal the Mafia in America, the innermost sanctums of the Mafia in America at its top, at its highest level.
And when you see the highest level of the Mafia in America, what do you see?
You see power and greed and deception and betrayal.
And the notion that the way you do business is whacking people, as they say.
Well, no, the hits, of which there are many, many, are basically a method of control, of discipline. Keep people in line. Very few...
Or send them a message.
Well, if you're dead, there's not much of a message.
No, but I mean, if you get the guy next to you, then you get the message.
All of Sammy's, quote, innocent victims, unquote, which I've read about in the paper, and all murder is reprehensible. I mean, that's obvious. But all the people who died as a result of his participation in the murders were mob connected. Many of them were killers themselves.
So?
The point is, well, you were implying that he went out and they killed people at random.
No, I wasn't implying that at all.
Oh, okay.
I didn't say that at all. But you seem sensitive about that subject. I mean, one of the criticisms is that you hear when you do this is, this is a guy who killed 19 people.
Right.
Or had a role in the killing of 19 people.
Absolutely.
And you step forward and say, well, gee, they were all in the Mafia. You know, they were all people with unclean hands.
Well, I suppose I said that, and it does sound bad, and I agree with you, is the fact is that all these people knew what could happen. Murder in that world, which is another thing I want, it's a world so removed from your world or my world that it's ludicrous almost. But murder in that world that he lived in is an everyday common event. And they don't even call it a murder. It's a piece of work.
piece of work.
Yeah.
Gotti. What did you learn about John Gotti, who sits in a prison in Marion, I guess?
Yes, he is there. I don't think he'll be there forever in Marion. They only can keep him there so long. They'll move him somewhere, I'm sure.
Because that's the most secure prison in America?
It is. They've got another one in Colorado that's supposed to be more secure.
Okay. What did you learn about John Gotti? I want to come to some of these other questions in a minute.
The extraordinary megalomania, number one, which we knew about, but Sammy had some very interesting insights about him. For instance, it's well known that John Gotti was a degenerate gambler. Gambled constantly. And Sammy had a funny line about it. You know, he gambled every day. He bet on every sport. If there were 10 football games, he bet on 10 football games, the whole line of baseball. He said in all this time, he never heard John Gotti once say, boy, I had a real winner yesterday. All he ever talked about were the losers. I lost. The horse lost by half a nose. The Jets didn't cover by half a point. And Sammy, and this is just speculation on his part, but I think it was very incisive. He said, you know, he had read somewhere or heard somewhere that really degenerate gamblers want to lose inside, unconsciously.
Did he translate that to interpolate that to some notion that Gotti wanted to be caught?
Not actively, consciously, but certainly on the record, John Gotti did everything possible to contribute to his own downfall. Out, you know, in Cosa Nostra, it's supposed to be a secret society. You're supposed to be in the shadows. John Gotti is out there every day in his $2,500 Brioni suits.
Because he wanted to fuel the notion that he was invincible.
Yes, he did. You're absolutely right. I do believe that. He came to, as Sammy said, the cameras had a love affair with John Gotti, and he began to have a love affair with himself. He was a media darling. I mean, he was, for the newspaper and television reporters, they had these other bosses with little stubby cigars and sweatshirts on.
You see him walking around. Every picture you see, any mugshot of these guys, they look like.
Or, say, Paul Castellano, dressed well, but he looked like a Wall Street businessman. There was a businessman. There was no excitement, nothing you could do. And here comes John Gotti, and he played it fairly well. As I said earlier, he looked and acted just the way America wanted a gangster to look. And Sammy, finally, the other captains in the family came to Sammy and says, listen, you're the only one John will listen to. You've got to tell, we can't have these meetings every night at the Ravenite Club. That was the social club on Mulberry Street. He said, you can hardly talk for hearing the FBI cameras clicking all over the place and vans, and they're writing down license. They said, John is handing the whole family over to the FBI. They know who every member is, because if you were a member of the Gambino family, you had to show up at least once a week at the Ravenite Club. And Sammy had to go there every night.
What was the attraction of John Gotti to Sammy Gravano and the attraction of Sammy Gravano for John Gotti?
I think in the beginning, Sammy thought John, first of all, he recognized what a charismatic figure he was. He thought he was smart. He certainly did in the beginning think he was smart. And he thought he had the qualities of leadership. John Gotti needed Sammy because in Gotti's plotting to kill Paul Castellano in the famous shooting in front of Sparks Steakhouse, John Gotti could not do this on his own. His crew, which is his group within the family, was a work crew. That's what they called crews that went out and did the hits. But still, Paul Castellano was a powerful man. He was the boss of the family. And Sammy had another crew. It was a work crew. And there was still another one named Frank DeChico who died. That's another story. But John Gotti, he was afraid of Paul Castellano, and he needed Sammy and Frank DeChico to go along with this plot to kill Castellano.
If you strike a king, you better kill him.
You better kill him and watch out that somebody else isn't going to come after you because of that. Yeah. And somebody did, but John escaped.
Somebody tried to hit John.
Yes,
after
it was
he hit
Vincent
Castellano.
the Chin Gigante, who was very close to Paul Castellano and certainly did not like this.
They liked Castellano, didn't they?
Well,
the mob people.
Well, no, what happened with Castellano was he lived in this great mansion on Tote Hill. He was the king of the hill.
Staten Island.
Yeah, the highest part of Staten Island, great view of the Verrazano Bridge and so on. The most exclusive part of Staten Island. I mean, his home cost $3.5 million, and it would have cost a lot more if they didn't control a lot of the construction unions. And the rest, he never bothered to come down into the valley, so to speak, to the clubs, the social clubs. He lost touch with the street, and the members began to grumble that he was just interested in lining his own pocket.
But is that why Gotti made the hit against Castellano? Because
No.
Gotti simply wanted to be uno numero.
He capitalized on that.
He took advantage of that
Feeling.
flaw that
Yes,
Castellano
because
had.
Castellano despised Gotti, who was protected by his then underboss, a man named Della Croce. I know this is getting complicated, but when Della Croce died, John Gotti knew it was either him or Paul Castellano. One or the other would have to go, because Castellano despised him. It's quite complicated because...
I understand. Let me go to some other points here. Yeah. So during all of this, what did Sammy ask of you? Tell my story right? Get it right?
Yes. Now, I'm sure he didn't come out and say it in so many words, but in effect, he expected that.
What did he want from you? Good book, and that's it?
Yes, he wanted, I think he wanted...
Or what he's got, all this attention and telling his story and being on 2 hours of primetime television?
I think one of the things he wanted this book to do, probably the most important thing, was that when he flipped, as they say, when he turned government witness, he was so vilified by Gotti and his allies, for instance, the dog story.
Yeah. And he was called the rat.
Well, look, he doesn't deny he's a rat.
Right.
He's very out front about it, but he says, who did I rat against?
Yeah. But
he wanted the reality of why he did. I think that was the most important thing. He wanted the reality of what he did and why he did it conveyed.
Well, so he's got your book, and that's all he asks of you, nothing else.
Not that I know of.
Everybody believes, most people believe, he's getting something out of this.
I know, it's a big thing.
Even the district attorney of the state of New York has waded into this.
That's the problem, and I tell you, I'm really sorry about this. I would love to go into great detail with you about this, but apparently the state attorney general has taken legal action against me and the publisher. I think they're
trying to force you to release all documents you have.
No, they want to see the contract, my contract with the publisher, and
so what?
My lawyers and the publisher's lawyers have said we're all going to answer all this, and we're going to answer it in court, and we don't want you running around on radio and television, probably saying something inflammatory, which they're probably right that I would do. So I can't say anything. All I can say is this. The one thing they'll let me say is that I have not violated the Son of Sam law, and we've already talked to the Attorney General about it, and apparently that's not good enough.
Okay, but can you say anything definitive about the fact that Sammy Gravano is getting nothing out of this publication of a book written by Peter Moss?
Well, you've got me in a tough spot here. They say I cannot comment on anything, and I want to comment on it. And my comment, if I made one, would be positive.
Okay. Any reason you wouldn't want anybody to see that contract?
Personally?
Yeah.
And again, I'm getting into something I shouldn't. First Amendment.
That's the only reason.
Yes. Well,
it's not that the contents of it. It's not the contents of it. It's the fact that
if they can get my contract, you decide to write a book, they can get yours.
And I'd be embarrassed by what I got. Yeah. So Gravano makes the deal. He decides to flip because he thinks that Gotti is going to. Gotti insists on being at all the meetings with his lawyer being there. He gets all these signals that say to him, Gotti is going to blame me for this. I'm going to be the heavy for this, right. And Gotti is going to somehow work this deal so that I come out the loser.
Right.
That's what's in his head.
That's correct.
So in the end, perhaps standing alone, he flips. He calls the prosecutor or the FBI and says, let's talk. Yeah. And then later he calls Peter Moss through some lady and says, let's talk.
Yes.
And he tells your story.
Yes. Can I say one thing?
Yes.
When I heard this theory of his perception that that Gotti was going to make him take the fall, as they say. I speak like they do. I've been around long enough. I talked to the prosecutor in the case, John Gleason, who's now a federal judge and an extraordinary man, and he told me that that it was not fantasy on Sammy's part. For several months before Sammy showed up to cooperate, Gleason and his prosecutorial team were tailoring their prosecution on exactly the same theory that Sammy had, that Sammy would take the fall. And that was kind of corroboration, no?
Yeah, I've read your book, but you know what else is true? I watched Diane Sawyer on Turning Point, too. He's acting like Gotti. He's cocky. He's basically saying things like, well, if they come after me, it's going to be a shootout. You know, they'll get me or I'll
No,
get
he didn't
them.
say that. If they come after me and they've got a gun, I'm going out in a box. I think that was his phrase.
Because he doesn't have access to a gun?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Well, I don't think he does. I think because, he's convicted. He was sentenced.
Who's watching him?
I don't know. I really don't know. I don't even know where he is. I can't reach him if I want to call him.
It's one of these, I'll call you, don't call
and
me.
he does, maybe once a week.
When's the last time you heard from him?
About 6 days ago.
What did he say?
He wanted to know what the jacket was like, the book jacket.
Does he like it?
I guess he does. This is what I told him. I said, Sammy, you're on the front, and I'm on the back, and it's easy to see who had the facelift. And he laughed.
What plastic surgery? Was it because he had to straighten his nose out or something?
Inside.
It was part, not just vanity, it was part to help him breathe.
Yeah, he couldn't breathe. He really couldn't breathe.
The Mafia, changing?
It's in total disarray at the moment.
The federal government and whoever prosecuted Gravano. Oh, Gotti.
Not Gotti, right. And Gravano for a time.
He served how much time?
5 years.
Federal government believes whatever, when they weigh the testimony of Sammy Gravano versus convicting all the people that he helped convict versus one guy getting off, essentially, who acknowledges 19 murders, they made a good deal. Right? Did they?
The government usually does that.
Okay, but do you agree with them?
Yes, I can't change that system.
No, not change the system. Was it a good deal for everybody concerned?
Oh, yeah, I think the Mafia is on the ropes today. I don't think it's going to go away, but it'll never be what it was. I think he essentially destroyed its structure. Not only Gotti, but 2 other family bosses. Vincent the Chin Gigante is going on trial in June because Sammy testified that he was, in fact, sane. That was a marvelous bit of... when you're in
the guy who walks around Greenwich Village in his bathing suit, in his pajamas and his robe.
Yeah.
All right. Underboss is the book. Sammy the Bull Gravano's Study of Life in the Mafia by Peter Moss. Peter Moss has written well about Serpico, has written well about the Valachi papers, and it is a remarkably interesting story because it gives you at least some insight into a life that all of us don't want to be part of and don't know anything about, and somehow is compelling and fascinating. Witness how many people are buying this book and how many people are watching television interviews with Gravano as well as with Peter Moss. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie. It's always a great pleasure to be with you.
Thanks. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.
On Monday, John Gotti, one of America's most infamous figures of organized crime, died at the age of 61. In the 1980s, the New York mobster that the New York tabloids called the Dapper Don was the face of modern organized crime to much of the country. His death has stirred discussion of the state of organized crime today in this country. Joining me now for a consideration of this question, Selwyn Rabb, former Metropolitan reporter for the New York Times, who is working on a book on the mob right now, and Abraham Abramovsky, professor of criminal law at the Fordham University School of Law. I'm pleased to welcome them both to the table. John Gotti, why was he such a legend?
He was a legend because the media made him a legend. It was all fiction. He was a creation of the media and the tabloids. And he was turned into a glamorized folk hero. He had a lot of credit for things he didn't do. Without television, without the newspapers, he would have been a minor character.
Well, now that's an interesting question, because one of the things I've always wondered is who invented John Gotti? In other words, was it the FBI and law enforcement who said, focus on this guy, he's the new boss, knowing that they already had an indictment? Was it the press who took one look at him and said, look at him, he's irresistible, he looks like the gangsters from the movies? Or was it the media?
Well, it was a combination, of course, but the media
Or was
elevated
it John
his
Gotti
stature.
who said, I love this, and essentially put himself out there in the public eye when he could have hidden?
Yeah, well, the distinction was he didn't hide like all the traditional mob leaders. What he did was he loved the attention. He basked in it. That famous line that he was sitting in a restaurant with Sammy the Bull Gravano, and Sammy saw people staring at the Gotti, and he said, "John, do you object to this? Do you want me to tell them to stop staring?" And he said, "No, that's my public."
That's my public, which is pretty much, Professor, the antithesis of a mob boss's position, working as the leader of a secret society where, by the nature of the deal, to join up to become a made guy, the very mention or admission that the society even exists is supposed to be punishable by death.
Well, you certainly don't want to stick out as a person that is looked at. What you try to do is you try to work the shadows in the back rooms, maintain your anonymity as much as possible, and then ply your trade.
So did John Gotti help the Mafia by putting it on the map? Perhaps, forgive me for this, but I'm making a suggestion that if you look back from The Sopranos today to when he started this, popularize the Mafia, or did he hurt it very badly?
I think that he hurt it rather badly. I think that, well, he popularized it and he hurt it very badly. I think he hurt his own family very badly by insisting that they come to the same place to give them the respect at the Rav nightclub and so forth. And, you know, it doesn't take a genius on the side of law enforcement to figure out that if they are summoned to a particular place at a particular time, the video machines are going to be going.
Now, why did he do that? Every Wednesday, every captain in the Gambino crime family, the men who lorded over the crews of soldiers, had to report to the Ravenite Social Club, where they had to know the FBI, the NYPD Intelligence Division were watching, filming. What was the reason for operating in the open?
He was a gift to the FBI and to the prosecutors. He gave them a who's who of who was in the family. The reason, of course, is that obvious insecurity on his part that he needed so much attention and adulation and loyalty, and he didn't care. He felt that somehow or other he could either fix a jury, the way he had done in previous cases before he was convicted, that he was so insulated he would never be captured. And that was part of that pathological personality that he had, that if anyone showed him the slightest disrespect, there was one minor capo from Connecticut who couldn't come there on the appointed day, he had him killed. And that was his idea of how he would intimidate and frighten, and he would run the family with that kind of tyrannical, overseeing attitude. And that was part of this whole personality makeup. He loved it. He thought of himself as some kind of Robin Hood.
Yet there was something there, meaning when I spoke to wise guys, as I'm sure you did, about John Gotti, in the early days, they felt that he was finally the boss they'd been waiting for. A guy from the streets, a guy who didn't mind getting his hands dirty, a guy that hadn't been insulated so far away that you could never get a meeting with him.
Well, that was...
You disagree, though?
There was a dichotomy in the Gambino family, and he certainly was not liked by the bosses in the other family. They thought he drew too much attention to the whole concept of organized crime, which was supposed to be a secret organization. And within the family, the Gambino family, one of the 5 major families in the New York area, he sort of promised he was going to bring a reform administration, a share the wealth concept. That he had engineered the murder of his predecessor, Paul Castellano, and there was some discontent in the family that Castellano wasn't sharing the wealth, and Gotti said he would do so. But they quickly learned that he wasn't that kind of reform and eager to help out anyone else in the family. And he certainly
He
antagonized.
viewed himself that way, though.
He viewed himself.
On one tape, he said, listen, I'm not a greedy boss. All I want is a good sandwich, and, you know, I'm not like Paul. I don't care about the money.
But at the same time, anyone who crossed him or he thought wasn't paying off or wasn't channeling or funneling enough money to him, he had him killed. So, and that word spread very quickly. But a best example of how he was disliked was the two other families, the Genovese family run by Vincent the Chin Gigante, and the Lucchese family tried to kill him almost 3 months after he took office. So he was not liked, and probably the best example of why he was overthrown and why he was undermined was because of all the rats, all the squealers in the family, who detested him, who felt he had abused them, he had in many ways threatened them. And there was no shortage. The FBI had about 5 or 6 people inside his own family that were ratting on him.
Including, ultimately, in the end,
Gravano.
His own right-hand man, his own underboss, the man who should have been closest to him, most loyal, his one-time consigliere and underboss.
Yeah, well, doesn't that tell you something about his choices of people around him, and his selection and his whole ability to run a family or an organization?
It may have been a singular worst personnel decision. So, was Gotti an effective boss? And if not, who was the best boss?
I think he was a little bit more effective than my friend to the left says. He did have, I believe, the respect of a certain faction of organized crime. I would say that certainly bosses like Gigante probably will be deemed in history to be more effective, ultimately.
Which is very funny, considering that Gotti played the role of the gangster, at least visually, the clothes, the cars, the phalanx of bodyguards that we knew from fiction, whereas Gigante, dressed in a bathrobe, wandered the streets muttering to himself, pretended to be non-compos mentis, or was, there's still a debate, while running the family that was considered the Ivy League of the underworld.
Right.
Yet you think he was more effective?
I would think so.
He lasted longer.
He certainly did, and he brought, I believe, in the long run, less attention to his family. And I think that the role model of the future in the mob organizations is not going to be Gotti. It's not going to be that type of attitude. It's not going to be that in your face, I'm not worried about you prosecutors and you feds type deal. I think it's going to be back to the old Carmine Galante days, you know, quiet, out of the spotlight, doing their thing.
But remember what happened to him. He was, his body was carried out under the sign that said Joe and Mary's Restaurant, outgoing orders are specialty.
That's right.
So there are people who have pronounced at various times that this indictment, this case, is a death knell to the mob, that the mob is down on one knee, that the mob is dead. Is the mob dead?
The mob is not dead. The mob has been alive and will be alive. The question is
the mob making the big money it was making 10, 15 years ago?
I don't think so. And the reason that the mob is not making the big money, as big a money, is that there are new kids on the block. There's all kinds of organized crime groups, ranging from the Russians to the Colombians to the Mexicans to the Nigerians. It's almost you come up with a nationality and there's an alleged organized crime group around.
So, and I want you to weigh in on that. Where, as John Gotti so often said, where are we going here? Where's the mob going?
It's wounded, and it's far from dead, and these declarations about it being finished have often been mistaken. They have a remarkable power of rejuvenation. What most people don't understand is that the mob is always fed, or organized crime, or the mafia, has fed essentially on its bread and butter, which is gambling and loan sharking. And that's always been the seed money for other ventures, for other enterprises. And the distinction now is, there's no question, because of a combination of factors, a very tough RICO law, racketeer influence, corrupt organizations law, which has given the government a prosecutorial tool that it never had before.
And the incredible technology, electronic technology available to eavesdrop now that wasn't around even 10 years ago.
But the distinction is that, unlike the other organized crime factions, the question is, why has The Mafia lasted for 70 years. And the reason is that the organization is more important than the individual. That you can always, that even if a boss goes, the organization remains. And a major distinction is that the FBI and prosecutors and the Justice Department have been very effective in other cities. We have only had one crime family. In New York, we have 5, plus at least 2 others in the New Jersey area. So whenever there's a vacuum, there's someone to fill that vacuum. And I think the other real nemesis, or perhaps problem that's going to be confronted by the Justice Department and all the law enforcement agencies, is that organized crime is no longer a priority. It's no longer a criminal priority. And especially with the impact of terrorism. And there has to be a reduction. I know already there has been a reduction in the vigilance, in the surveillance, and the whole technique of keeping an eye on what's going on.
I've spoken to organized crime figures within the last 3 or 4 months who said, Johnny, we've had more sit-downs in the last 8 months than we've had in the last 8 years. Meaning that they feel that the FBI is off their backs, that the constant surveillance has abated, that their ability to move around and even get together without one or more of them or all of them being followed is over for now, and that they're taking advantage of that. Is the end of the government's juggernaut, signaled by the prioritizing of terrorism, going to lead to the rebirth of the Mafia, let's say, of the 70s?
I think it's possible. I don't know about the rebirth of the 70s, but certainly you have X number of manpower and you have limited resources. Now, when you're in a situation that you're worried about the health, safety, and well-being of all of your citizenry, all kind of a sudden, the Al-Qaeda organization and others like it become your prime targets as opposed to the Gambino family.
Now, everybody has been taken with the romance, the familiarity with the specter of shows like The Sopranos, although you don't really see a John Gotti character on The Sopranos. Why do you think it is that the mob, even wounded, even down on one knee, still captures the public imagination so much? And how much do you think John Gotti had to do with that?
Gotti had a little to do with it. The Sopranos has a little to do with it, and the myths that were created by movies like The Godfather have a lot to do with it. It validates their existence in the sense that these kinds of fictional programs or fictional movies create the image that there are good mafiosi and bad mafiosi. Some of them are doing this because they have no other choice. It's the only way they can get ahead in the world. And that's where the real danger is. Plus, people like Gotti created this idea that here was someone opposing the government, anti-establishment, the vicarious kick of someone who can...
Americans always are drawn to the character like that.
And then and especially young kids.
From Daniel Boone, any loner who went out.
Who defies.
Yes.
So he filled that picture as someone you could get away, you could live well, you could be an important, powerful person, and you could be a media character, celebrity. And he fulfilled that kind of views. It's a quick way of getting ahead and becoming an important personality. And that's where I think the media really falls down, by glorifying people like this, or saying there's some kind of justification to what they do and the reason they have to do it.
Yet he did sell papers. When Gotti was on the front page of the Daily News or the New York Post, the papers went.
Yeah, well, here's an example of how we misstate, the press and the media in general confuse our priorities. On the same day that John Gotti died, Ben Ward died. Ben Ward was the first black police commissioner in New York. He was relegated to the back pages, and even my obituary, and I like getting on page 1, was on page 1, and it was much longer than Ben Ward's obituary.
And on the same day that John Gotti died, the FBI and the Defense Department and the CIA arrested the man who was charged with allegedly plotting to carry out the first dirty bomb attack in New York.
Well, but there's perhaps
which came as I mean, there was a fight for the headline that day,
right,
which is interesting.
Well, on the question of Ward and Gotti, you can almost say, look how editors and look at those two deaths. Crime pays.
John Gotti, sum him up in 20 seconds.
I think he was viewed as a charismatic leader for his group. I think he was viewed as the mafioso, but in fact, I think he hurt organized crime and his family more than he helped it.
His legacy in 20 seconds?
He did more to undermine his own family and organized crime than any single figure in the last 50 years.
Well, he certainly did leave his mark, no matter how you view him or his time. Probably since Al Capone, the most notorious mob boss of our times. We'll be right back.